The William F. Buckley Jr. stamp. I can't help but begin by remarking on how perfectly appropriate that seems, because in all places and for all time, Americans will affix that stamp on the right. At this time, would you please stand for the national anthem, which will be performed by Craig Stagg.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Thank you, Craig. You did hit those high notes. Our first speaker is the Dean of Yale College, Pericles Lewis. As you might well imagine, the Dean of Yale College is almost impossibly distinguished. He is the Douglas Tracy Smith Professor of Comparative Literature and Professor of English. He is a prolific author and a contributor to publications that include the Chronicle of Higher Education, the Harvard International Review, that must be an oversight, the Harvard International Review, the Los Angeles Review of Books, the Times Higher Education, and many other publications. Please welcome the Dean of Yale College, Pericles Lewis.
Thank you, Mr. Robinson, Mr. Buckley, Mr. Will, Mr. Cronkite, Ms. Noble, and honored guests. On behalf of Yale University President Mari McInnes, it is my honor to welcome you to this dedication ceremony. I'm grateful to be here to honor William F. Buckley Jr., one of Yale College's most distinguished alumni. I'd like to thank the United States Postal Service, the Buckley family, and artist Dale Stefanos, who brought Buckley's striking image to life on this commemorative stamp. Stefanos' portrait of Buckley so aptly captures the spirit of sharp intellect, determination, and thoughtful discourse that shaped Buckley's time here at Yale College and his intellectual leadership of the conservative movement. Today, we are proud of how Buckley's legacy endures at Yale in the Yale Daily News, Yale Political Union, and Conservative Party, in all of which he took a leading role. In 2010, a group of undergraduates founded the Buckley Institute, named in his honor, whose programs and initiatives continue to foster free expression and diversity of perspective on campus. As a young Canadian, I learned a lot about the United States and about the exchange of ideas from watching William F. Buckley on firing line. At that time, I certainly did not anticipate that I would become someday the Dean of Yale College, a role in which I've come to appreciate Buckley's legacy more deeply. As you know, Buckley enrolled at Yale directly after his service in World War II. Looking back 3/4 of a century to when he graduated at the age of 25, many of the issues that we face at Yale today were already on the mind of this thoughtful critic. The post-war period saw a great expansion of higher education due to the GI Bill. It also witnessed the growth of the great research universities that have contributed so much to our country and our economy through discoveries in medicine, technology, and other fields. At Yale, the residential college system was less than 20 years old, and the influx of veterans like Buckley led to undergraduate enrollment exceeding 4,000 for the first time. Rereading God and Man at Yale recently, I was struck by Buckley's emphasis on how college teaching intersects with the culture of scholarship. He stood at the cusp of an important transformation in American academic culture. He focused above all on the challenge of transmitting the traditional values associated with college in the context of the newly emerging research university. It is clear that he took full advantage of the opportunities provided by student debate and journalism at Yale to hone the skills that would make him such a formidable historical figure. His lively sense of humor also suggests that he enjoyed himself very much while he was here. Although the book became famous for its criticisms of his alma mater, I was also struck by the deep love for Yale that motivated Buckley's insights. Let me conclude by reminding you of his dedication of the book, which reads, "For God, for country, and for Yale," in that order. Thank you again to the Buckley family, to the United States Postal Service, and to all of you for being here in celebration today.
It's my pleasure now to introduce Lauren Noble, the founder and executive director of the Buckley Institute here at Yale, which she started when she was a senior at this institution. Lauren worked for the presidential campaign of Governor Mitt Romney. The Buckley Institute, however, is a success. And her writings have appeared in outlets including the Wall Street Journal, Real Clear Education, and of course, above all, National Review. Please welcome Lauren Noble.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the official William F. Buckley Jr. Forever Stamp dedication ceremony. I'd like to thank Christopher Buckley for honoring the Buckley Institute with the opportunity to be part of this special event. And thank you also to Yale College Dean Pericles Lewis and Yale for welcoming this event. The stamp being unveiled today commemorates the 100th anniversary of the birth of William F. Buckley Jr., a singular individual in the history of this country. But I would like to bring us back to a date a little closer, one just over 75 years ago, February 22nd, 1950. Back then, Yale was still Bill Buckley's stomping ground, and he was chosen to give the Alumni Day speech just a few steps from where we stand. Buckley later recounted what happened when he handed his draft speech to the director of the University News Bureau. The director asked him, "What are you saying in it?" "Nothing, I hope." Well, it turned out Bill Buckley had quite a lot to say. His draft speech sharply criticized Yale's administration and its approach to education. If Buckley insisted on that speech, Yale leaders said, they would find someone else. Buckley didn't speak that February day. Notwithstanding this one act of censorship, Buckley wasn't silenced, of course. He expanded on the theme of his undelivered speech with the publication of God and Man at Yale, launching his career on the national stage. And he became the most prominent voice in the American conservative movement, building institutions that still shape politics today. Neither did his criticisms of Yale fully sour him on his alma mater. After all, he returned to campus in 2000 to receive an honorary degree. It is fitting, then, to unveil the stamp dedicated in his honor here at Yale, an institution he clearly appreciated throughout his life, even as he sought to rectify its flaws. Today, the Buckley Institute is proud to carry that torch. Like our eponym, we are committed to building a better Yale, even if we criticize it here and there along the way. We are honored to keep the legacy of William F. Buckley Jr. alive for a new generation. It's a legacy worth preserving forever. Thank you.
Thank you, Lauren. I'm going to repeat that Lauren is the director of the Buckley program here at Yale, Bill's living legacy at this magnificent university. We are pleased to have several guests of honor in the audience. Bill's son, Christopher, who's going to stand up now whether he wants to or not. Christopher's cousins, Cameron Smith and William F.B. O'Reilly, are on this piece of paper. Are they also in the audience? Because if so, they must stand. Yes, yes, you have no choice. We want to thank, I'm a Dartmouth man, these following words are extremely difficult for me to pronounce. We want to thank Yale University, particularly the staff of the Yale Library. And of course, again, we want to thank the Buckley Institute. You've already heard from Lauren, but we have here one of the student leaders, William Barbee, who is going to be required to stand. Stand up. And we have the United States Postal Service Connecticut District Manager, Joshua Balkunas, who must also stand. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our dedicating official, Isaac Cronkite, the Chief Processing and Distribution Officer. I want to get this exactly right because I want my mail to continue uninterrupted. The Chief Processing and Distribution Officer and Executive Vice President of the United States Postal Service. Mr. Cronkite leads more than 140,000 employees in facilities across the nation that process and distribute mail to the organization's logistics and delivery partners, an enormous undertaking. He promises that the mail is being delivered today as normal, even though he's here. Ladies and gentlemen, Isaac Cronkite.
Thank you, Peter, for that kind introduction. Well done. You will get your mail tomorrow, I promise. So, beautiful day, beautiful setting. One of the perks of my job is the opportunity to be a part of stamp ceremonies like this. And I'm delighted to join you for today's celebration of William F. Buckley Jr. An important goal of the United States Postal Service stamp program is to raise awareness and honor people, places, and things that represent the very best of our nation. And we believe that Mr. Buckley is so richly deserving of this honor. He was many things: a conservative intellectual and author, a television host, a publisher, an essayist, a sailor, a novelist, as well as a friend to many people across the political spectrum. But above all, he was a fierce believer in the power of ideas to shape democracy. While best known for his political commentary, he was also a fiction writer. One of my favorite books is Elvis in the Morning, which is a fantastic fictional story about the life, career, and tragic death of Elvis Presley from the perspective of a boy who grew up listening to Elvis records in the morning before school, who unexpectedly became a confidant and friend to the king of rock and roll. As one of our more influential public intellectuals, Mr. Buckley was able to combine different strands of conservative thought into a cohesive movement that shaped American politics and culture for decades. In 1955, he founded National Review magazine, which became the leading conservative publication of the nation. And in 1966, he created Firing Line, the Emmy Award-winning public affairs TV program that featured spirited discussions on issues of the day in a format that engaged conservative and liberal viewers alike. He understood something that is often forgotten today. Democracy isn't strengthened by surrounding ourselves with people who think as we do. Democracy is strengthened by engaging seriously with those who challenge us. He understood that the health of our democracy depends not just on having the right answers, but by asking the right questions. I think we can all learn something from his approach. Let us remember his example, not because his politics were always correct, many of us might dispute that notion, but because his approach to politics and his intellectual courage was fundamentally healthy for a democracy. In his landmark debate with James Baldwin at Cambridge University in 1965, he exemplified the lost art of intelligent, respectful, and civilized discourse on complicated issues, something that is increasingly rare in today's polarized climate. We would do well to remember his example. If you have never watched that debate, I encourage you to do so and be reminded that our political opponents do not have to be our enemies. They're our fellow Americans, and they just might have something to teach us. We need the tension between perspectives because that's how we avoid the radicalism that would tear everything down and the reactionary impulse that would never let anything change. That's the America that William F. Buckley believed in, an America that is strong enough to handle disagreement, confident enough to engage with dissent, and wise enough to know that our democracy is an ongoing conversation where the clash of ideas ultimately serves the common good. At this time, I would like our other participants, Christopher Buckley, George Will, Lauren Noble, Pericles Lewis, and Peter Robinson to join me for the official unveiling of the dedication of the William F. Buckley Jr. Forever stamp. Stamps have been called our nation's calling cards, which is why we take great care with their design and art direction. The stamp, designed by art director Greg Breeding, features a black and white portrait of Mr. Buckley based on a photograph taken by Steve Shapiro in the 1960s. Artist Dale Stefanos used graphite and charcoal on hot-press watercolor paper, drawn to the way the image captured his resolute expression. The final portrait depicts Mr. Buckley's sharp focus with direct eye contact that suggests deep thought rather than confrontation. Mr. Stefanos felt that this quality was essential for conveying the essence of his legacy. I think you'll agree they did a wonderful job in capturing his spirit. It's a fitting tribute to his remarkable intellect, wit, and eloquence, and an enduring legacy of his ideas. The stamp is available now at our website, USPS.com, and at post offices nationwide. Thank you.
That really is Bill. Dale Stefanos, the artist, Stand up, stand up. One more round of applause. Thank you again to Isaac Cronkite. I am pleased, humbled, abashed, slightly nervous about introducing our next speaker, George Will, who apparently is human. He's here, but I had to touch him to make sure of that. I've admired him and engaged in hero worship toward George Will for so long. George Will has been writing a twice-weekly syndicated column for the Washington Post since 1974. That means that this man has hit 2 deadlines a week for half a century and 1 year. He's a regular contributor to all kinds of television outlets. He has authored a number of books: Restoration, Congress, Term Limits, and the Recovery of Deliberative Democracy, Men at Work, The Craft of Baseball, and his Summa, The Conservative Sensibility. He was awarded the Pulitzer Prize for Commentary, and the Washington Journalism Review named him, I'm going to quote this, the best writer on any subject. Ladies and gentlemen, George Will.
Because it has been truly said that confession, although good for the soul, is bad for the reputation, I have a confession to start with. I was once a college professor. The stain endures. Actually, I mention that because it's relevant to Bill Buckley's astonishing capacity and talent for friendship. In June 1976, his brother Jim, having won the Senate in 1970 on the Conservative Party line, the Republican Party came to its senses and nominated him in 1976 for another term in the Senate. That night, a man who became one of my best friends and a good friend of Bill Buckley's, Pat Moynihan, was nominated by the Democrats. Over at Jim Buckley's headquarters, Jim said, "I look forward to running against Professor Moynihan. I congratulate Professor Moynihan on his nomination tonight. I look forward to ensuring that Professor Moynihan will run the kind of high-caliber campaign you would expect of a Harvard professor." Back at Pat's headquarters, a journalist said, "Pat, Jim Buckley is referring to you as Professor Moynihan." Pat drew himself up to his full, considerable height and said, the mudslinging has begun." But Pat, of course, became one of the legion of friends that he had. I am a lapsed professor, very lapsed, 55 years lapsed and counting. But I want to do what Bill, who was our public professor, always taught the country to do, which is start with fundamentals. Ask the basic questions. The basic question I want to ask is, why do we have politics at all? It permeates everything, makes almost everyone cranky. In 2 months, politics is going to spoil millions of Thanksgiving dinners. Why do we have politics? Trout get along very well without politics. Ants and beaver collaborate in building anthills and dams, but no one talks about the politics of ants or the politics of beaver. Bees even have a hierarchy in an apiary, queens and drones, but we don't talk about the politics of an apiary. What is it about human beings that makes us have these extraordinary, unfortunate things called politics? Well, actually, they're not unfortunate. We have politics because we are unique creatures in 2 senses. We are egotistical about our opinionatedness. We have opinions and we're egotistical about them. We think they're the best because we are, as Aristotle said, language users. We are here today to honor and remember someone who took the English language to new heights and taught Americans to argue civilly, elegantly, and eloquently. most of all, he taught us to have fun. Politics is supposed to be fun. In 1948, an Arizona businessman, he ran a department store in Phoenix, decided to dip his toe into the maelstrom of politics by running for the Phoenix City Council. And this man named Barry Goldwater wrote a letter to his brother to explain. He said about politics, he said, "It ain't for life and it might be fun." Well, it pretty much was for life for Barry Goldwater, but he didn't always seem to be having fun. Fortunately, Yale in 1948 was incubating someone who would tell us how to enjoy politics, to make it fun. The purpose of politics, the first purpose, not the exhaustive purpose, but the first purpose of politics is to get people like us, opinionated and egotistical, to live peacefully together. Keep the peace. Now, some people say, well, that's not a grand enough mission for politics. That's banal. In the middle of 2025, it doesn't look so simple or banal. And what Bill showed was that opinionated, articulate, and egotistical people, that is, who prefer their own opinions, could have a wonderful time doing politics, and we could all have a wonderful time watching them do it. I remember when I first became a columnist, I did what I asked what I now know to be the question most asked of columnists. I called Bill and said, "How do you come up with all those things to write about?" Bill, without hesitating, said, "The world irritates me 3 times a week." But he was never seemed irritated. There was a high-spiritedness and fun to all this that kept going on. And while he was having fun, he managed to become the most consequential journalist in American history. Now, were he here, Bill would say being the most consequential journalist in America is like being the tallest building in Topeka. It doesn't mean much. Not true. Bill, I used to think, for self-interested reasons, that the Chicago Cubs won the Cold War. This, I thought, because the Cubs used to do a spring training in Catalina Island off the coast from Los Angeles in the 1920s and early 1930s. And an Iowa sportscaster from Des Moines named Dutch Reagan convinced his radio station to send him to Catalina Island to cover the Cubs spring training. And Reagan said, while I'm out there, I might get a screen test. Therefore, the Cubs launched the career that led to the end of the Cold War. Therefore, the Cubs won the Cold War. I have changed my mind. I think William F. Buckley won the Cold War for the very simple reason. Reagan, of course, won it, but no Reagan presidency without the Goldwater nomination. No Goldwater nomination without National Review, and no National Review without William F. Buckley. Ergo, Buckley won the Cold War, and that's an end of that. This man of many words, Bill Buckley, had so many words for Yale, this institution. And the quantity of words about this institution was itself a form of high praise. Harvey Mansfield, the professor at Harvard, who's justly known as Harvard's conservative, the conservative definite article, said that learning to praise is the sign of an educated man, because you can't praise without reference to standards. And it means someone who praises is acquainted with the high standards. Now, not all universities deserve our praise. A president of the University of Oklahoma once said that he hoped to make the University of Oklahoma an institution that the football team could be proud of. And he did so. But what we know Bill did with his first book, God and Man at Yale, was strike a spark that lit a fuse that is now formed into an efflorescence of debate about the role of universities in our life. Bill knew that universities had evolved through 800 years through ecclesiastical and political thickets. and that what was the product of 800 years can be kicked away in a generation. And Bill was one of those who summoned people to a conversation that now is at a rolling boil, a conversation about these great institutions and what should be done about them. William F. Buckley was always proud of Yale, as Yale, by this ceremony here today, indicates it was and is proud of him. He was a teacher. Henry Adams once said, "A teacher attains a kind of immortality because he never knows where his influence ends." Certainly the ripples from Bill Buckley roll on and on. It's been well said that all politics is downstream from culture, and so much of our culture now is downstream from Bill Buckley, with which we are all grateful. One of his finest little books, small and sharp as a stiletto, had a simple title, Gratitude. We should be grateful to all of you for being here. We should be grateful to the Postal Service for arranging this fitting honor. But most of all, we should be grateful for the life well lived, downstream from which we all live, the life of William F. Buckley, Jr. Thank you.
Now, Christopher. Christopher Buckley is not only the son of our honoree today, William F. Buckley, Jr., he is himself impossibly accomplished. Magazine editor, essayist, author. He became managing editor of Esquire at the age of 24. At age 29, he became chief speechwriter to Vice President George Herbert Walker Bush. He is also the founder and editor-in-chief of Forbes Life magazine. His best-selling books include, if I listed all of Christopher's books, the sun would set before we continued with the ceremony, but his best-selling books include The White House Mess, Wet Work, Thank You for Smoking, Steaming to Bambula. He's also a recipient of the Thurber Prize for American Humor and the Washington Irving Medal for Literary Excellence. I mentioned that Christopher became chief speechwriter to Vice President, as he was then, George Herbert Walker Bush. He hired me as his deputy. Christopher remains today what he was when we were in our 20s, the coolest kid I know. Christopher Buckley.
Thank you. Hello. Following George Will is a dirty trick. Rest assured I shall be composing a strongly worded letter of protest to the Buckley program for putting me on after him. My father greatly admired and respected George as a columnist, essayist, thinker, polemicist, and conservative comrade in arms. Intimidating as it is to share this podium with George, it's an honor. I'm touched and grateful that he made a 600-mile round trip to be part of this celebration. Thank you. Our master of ceremonies, Peter Robinson, is an old and cherished friend. He made an even longer trip here from the Hoover Institute at Stanford. The distance from Hoover to Yale is measurable in thousands of miles and measurable in other ways. Peter is a resident scholar there where he writes books and hosts Hoover's fine television program, Uncommon Knowledge. He worked for half a dozen years at the White House writing speeches for George Herbert Walker Bush and Ronald Reagan into whose lips he put the soundbite heard round the world, "Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." I'm deeply grateful to Lauren Noble, founder and executive director of the Buckley program, now in its 15th year of providing Yale with DEI. Warm thanks to the United States Postal Service, which has printed, if this is accurate, 12 million WFB commemorative stamps. So there's still some left for you, Daniel Oliver. A tremendous amount of work and detail goes into a commemorative stamp. There are many, many qualifications. For one thing, you have to have been dead for 5 years. That's the easy part. Lindsay Craig and the National Review Institute started the ball rolling. My profound thanks, Leslie, for that work. So in the fullness of time, I received an email from the Postal Service, oxymoronic as that sounds. I said, apropos of this event, I said, "Are they sending out printed invitations?" I said, "Oops." Informing me that WFB would be honored with a stamp on the centenary year of his birth. The Washington Post called me for a comment. I said that it made me want to start stamp collecting all over again. There was a lot of back and forth on the design. At the end of the day, Dale, the fine design team at USPS, and Dale Stefanos came up with this one. The idea was to show WFB at the helm of his sailboat during a cocktail cruise on Long Island Sound in the middle of a howling northeast gale. He's saying to his terrified, drenched, captive guests, "Isn't this fun?" It also depicts him as he might look upon being told that he actually won the 1965 New York City mayoral race. He's about to demand a recount. Finally, today I want to thank dear old Mother Yale, without whom we would not be here today, for 2 reasons. First, obviously, for generously allowing us to hold this event on campus, fittingly in front of the Beinecke Library, the repository of the WFB archive, all 550 linear feet of them. If all those boxes were stacked one upon another, they'd probably topple over. But the second reason is, and here I'm repeating much of what Lauren has told you, but the second reason is that without Mother Yale, there might not have been a William F. Buckley Jr., at least as we knew him. 75, we should have done this together. 75 years ago, he was asked to give the Alumni Day speech, a great honor. He submitted the draft of his speech for review by the administration, housed there in that wonderful building, Woodbridge Hall. As they read his speech, a collective gasp was audible all the way down to the tables at Maury's, the place where Louis dwells, and well beyond. Mother Yale took a hit of smelling salts, cleared her throat, suggested that it might be a tad awkward giving a speech akin to Martin Luther's 95 Theses. He responded with noblesse oblige, recused himself, expanded the speech, and published it a year later under the title, God and Man at Yale. The rest you know, and here we are. 5 years after graduating from the university that he never stopped loving, despite their differences, he founded National Review. In the mission statement of the inaugural issue, he declared that National Review would stand athwart history, yelling, "Stop." It's a mighty line. I've been quoting it for years. I'm still not sure what it means, but it's right up there with Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall. Whatever it means, I think we can all agree that from this day forward, WFB stands athwart history, yelling, "Stamp." Thank you, United States Postal Service, Mr. Cronkite. Thank you, George Will, Peter, Lauren, everyone. Thank you all for coming. Dean Lewis, Bula Bula, beat Harvard.
Thank you, Christopher. Thank you to Isaac Cronkite of the Postal Service, Pericles Lewis, Dean Lewis, Lauren Noble, George Will, Christopher himself, Christopher's cousins. How could you not have done a better job keeping an eye on this cousin of yours through all these years? Thank you to Craig Stagg for hitting the high notes. There he is. Thank you to Dale Stefanos for this stamp. And of course, I want to thank each of you. I have to confess that when I first saw the stamp, my own first thought was of Pat Buckley. She would have bought the shirt and tie, my guess would be Brooks Brothers, and she would have tried for the 1,000th time to subdue her husband's hair. One afternoon when Bill was running late for firing line, I overheard Pat say, "Ducky, I simply will not permit you to leave the house looking like that." She produced a hairbrush and a can of hairspray and failed once again to subdue her husband's hair. As George Will has noted, no William F. Buckley Jr., no victory in the Cold War. I would like to add one step. No Pat Buckley, no William F. Buckley Jr. We've heard about the many things that Bill did well. May I tell you about a couple of things he did badly? Skiing. He skied with great bravado, courage, determination, but elegance is not an adjective you would use. Painting. Yes, I see a cousin smiling here. I spent a couple of months with Bill in Switzerland as a research assistant, and at one end of the big room in which he worked, he had set up a studio where he and his best friend in Switzerland, David Niven, would paint. One day, David Niven brought Marc Chagall, the great artist, to lunch, but only after making Bill promise that he would not show Marc Chagall any of their work. Bill met Chagall at the entrance to the chalet and immediately placed into the great man's hands a painting of Bill's of his own. Chagall stared at the painting for a moment and then said, "Oh, the poor paint." The harpsichord. Now, alone in his music room in Stamford, Bill was a marvel. He could handle very complicated passages at great speed. But not all the public performances were as successful. I can recall a performance that Bill gave with his Yale friend Tom Wendell with the San Jose Symphony, Bach. It was one of the concertos for two harpsichords. And what I recall most vividly about that evening is the way that the performance concluded. Bill and Tom reached the end of the concerto 2 or 3 very long seconds after the orchestra. But somehow I think these fascinations and enthusiasms that proved even Bill possessed certain limits somehow demonstrated his greatness, his superabundance of energy, his limitless love of life itself. There is that inner audacity, that insanely frivolous thing we call sanity. Here I'm quoting G.K. Chesterton. If a thing is worth doing, it is worth doing badly. Let me close, if I may, with a remark by one of Bill's own heroes, Milton Friedman. This was a dinner in San Francisco with half a dozen of us, sometime in the 1990s, and Milton Friedman said, "What is Bill Buckley's greatest gift?" And we went around the table. One said that Bill's greatest gift was for the essay, another that his greatest gift was as an editor, another for fiction, another for television performance, and on it went. And then Milton Friedman shook his head and said, "You're all wrong. Bill Buckley's greatest gift is for friendship." George Will, whom Bill hired when George still had no experience as a journalist. In the audience today, Daniel Oliver, who was, as a young Harvard grad, told Bill that he was reluctant to go to law school and join the New York establishment, so Bill gave him the most un-establishment job imaginable, putting Daniel to work on Bill's doomed but glorious 1965 campaign for mayor. Or me, I was a student at Oxford. I wrote to Bill, whom I had only met a single time, asking for job advice. He told me to get in touch with his son Christopher, who hired me into the White House as a speechwriter. Because his father had recommended me, Christopher never asked to see a writing sample, which was good for me because I had never written a speech in my life. When I interviewed Bill in 1994 for one of Christopher's magazines, this was during one of his weekend crossings of Long Island Sound, he discussed his love of sailing. He had been sailing since his father bought him a boat when Bill was 13. Now, if you go out on a sailboat and cross the Sound, I'm quoting Bill directly here, it gives you a satisfaction that isn't easily duplicated. But I would never be a solo sailor. Zero appeal in that. Things like this should be shared. History will remember William F. Buckley Jr., as it should, of course, as a truly great man, a truly great American. But those of us who knew him may be permitted to note one last time that he was also the best of friends. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you.